Zeros.
All right, so Don Hammond, criminal defense hero, and the man who gets drunk drivers off the hook, whether or not they deserve it, is with us to discuss the Bruce Springsteen arrest, as well as drunk driving in general. So this is the premiere episode of the Wine Diaries. The basic idea is kind of like a Zoom happy hour, although we don't use Zoom, we use StreamYard. And, whereas other people are drinking online and chatting about whatever, we try to be a little bit more focused and have some sort of goal in mind, roughly having to do with somehow making life in America a little bit better and addressing some of our societal problems while sipping wine. And I happen to have a Cabernet today. And what do you have, Don?
That's a good question. What do I have here? This is a...
what kind of a wine connoisseur doesn't even know what he's drinking? Oh, there you go. What is that? Okay. Do you know anything
that I found in my fridge?
Okay. You refrigerate red wine. Wow.
This is a white wine, Jeff.
Oh, it's white. I'm sorry. Okay. I think that's okay. Not that we have to play by the rules. I'm not a wine connoisseur at all, just a guy who enjoys it. So I'm drinking obscured dark red wine, and it doesn't even tell what kind of grapes are used in it. Sometime when we have a wine expert on, I want to get an explanation for that. And I know it says 2018, I think it had the vintage. Sometimes on some of these labels, it doesn't even tell. So I'm kind of curious what that's all about. Anyway, Bruce Springsteen was drinking tequila, not wine, and he was arrested for drunk driving in a New Jersey park back in November. And we have his ticket here that I can bring up. And that is the top portion of it. I zeroed on that because I found it to be sort of curious. I wanted to ask you about it. First of all, the officer's handwriting is such that I think he might have been drunk. It looks like a child stuck it between two of his toes to write that. But where it says location is the word lighthouse. And so my first question to you, Don, this layman, that strikes this layman as being ridiculously vague. Are they not supposed to put addresses? I mean, lighthouse.
They should put the address in there, but there's a second page of this on his statement of probable cause where he lays out that it's in the park. Right. And, he just put lighthouse there on the citation. No, I mean, the full package is going to go to the prosecutor and to the court. So it's not just what's on the citation. Right.
Yeah. The probable cause, we have that too over here. And let's get back to that in a minute. But getting back to the ticket, there's actually 3 different violations that Springsteen allegedly committed. They all have the same probable cause statement, but one of the violations, as you see there, is driving while intoxicated. And also there's another one that says use of alcohol in an enclosed area. I guess that means the park. And the other one is reckless driving. Now, that's another question I have, Don, because I always thought, I can see where you could be cited for drunk driving, even though you're not actually driving. If you started your car, you're sitting in your car, because it seems a little weird to have to wait until somebody drives dangerously before you're allowed to cite them for it. But reckless driving seems a little different. I always thought that had to do with actually driving. Can you explain why, even though the officer said, as we marked there in red, that he had only started his engine, how in the world does it make sense to accuse somebody of reckless driving when they're not even actually driving?
So that's certainly a question of New Jersey law, and we would have to go to the New Jersey Vehicle Code to see what exactly it says. Right. My bet is that this officer takes the position that driving with any measurable amount of alcohol in your system is by definition reckless. And I think that that's where the officer is getting that conclusion. I have doubts about whether that'll hold up in court, although it is very common to negotiate a DUI charge to a lesser offense of reckless driving, or in California, we have a thing called a wet reckless that we sometimes use in those situations. So No, I think that he wanted all of those things pled to ultimately give the driver the opportunity to maybe plead to one of the lesser charges, especially as we're eventually going to get to here, since the blood alcohol was so low. I mean, they have approximately a snowball's chance in hell of proving a DUI in this case. So maybe they can get him to plead to a reckless, though I don't even think that's likely.
All right, well, slow down, counselor. We'll get to that. And you are going to be increasing your level of alcohol as we go through this, and you'll be testing yourself throughout the chat. Is that correct?
That's correct. I have here in my hands a Alka-Sensor 4, which is the preliminary alcohol screening device that many police departments are using these days. It's now telling me to test. And it'll come up with zeros. All right, so there we go.
All right, well, you better get to it, Don. We need to have some actual intoxication here.
Starting out with zero. The issue is going to be, and it's also an issue in Springsteen's case, is there's a mouth alcohol concern that once I take a drink, I can spike this thing off the charts without actually having much of a blood alcohol content.
So they say it measures blood. I mean, BAC stands for blood alcohol content. And you're saying that's a misnomer when it's a breath test because it's measuring actually your breath, not what's in your blood?
It is. It takes a breath measurement, and what it's looking for is what we call deep alveolar air from the lungs to get that reading of the breath.
Look at Don doing this for science. I want to thank you for doing this for science, by the way, Don. I'm not sure why I'm drinking, but we'll come up with some good excuse.
Now it's going to take it a minute to process because it's finding that alcohol that I just put in my mouth. Right. Obviously, I took a couple of drinks. I don't think anybody would honestly say that I'm not okay to drive at this point when I just blew zeros and I had a few sips of wine.
Yeah. But you could have injected heroin separately, and that would affect.
That might be a concern. That certainly could be a concern.
Yeah. But is the New York Post going to be writing comedic headlines for you?
I hope not.
They came up with a few good ones. They were kind of spoofing themselves. This came from the New York Post itself, saying, "Here are a few headlines we were working."
I assumed that you put those together for fun.
No. You give me too much credit. All right. Anyway, so you're still at zero.
Oh, fours.
Hold on. What happened to Don? There he is.
You missed it, I think. It said 0.40.
0.40. That's way over.
Absolutely. I'd be dead at 0.4. That's the maximum for this machine.
So they use this in courts, even though it's what you seem to be proving right now is that it's highly inaccurate. Is that your point?
Well, yeah. There are serious problems with these devices, and one of them is a mouth alcohol problem. What I've just demonstrated is that having just that drink in my mouth created a very high reading on a machine that purports to measure deep alveolar air from the blood-breath barrier. It gets very complicated. There are partition ratio issues if you want to get nerdy into the science.
No, we don't. We can see that in a very short period of time, it's showing an astronomical reading.
Absolutely.
And so there's no trouble understanding.
That's exactly the problem. Is in this case, the cop watched him take a shot of tequila and then asked him to blow. I mean, he actually declined the portable device, which is a very smart move for what I just showed. For 15, 20 minutes is supposed to be the observation period before you give somebody a breath test. So if he had blown into this thing right after he took a shot, it may have shown a very high reading. Yeah,
so it's timing is an issue, and it could work in your favor depending on when, meaning you, the defendant or the accused, depending on when the alcohol is consumed. It might be in the arrestee's favor to wait, or it might be in the arrestee's favor to do it as soon as possible if they are going to submit to the test.
Right.
Correct?
That's the other problem is breath tests in general are rather unreliable during the absorption phase. You know, when you take a drink of alcohol, Jeff, it doesn't just instantly absorb into your body and get all over your bloodstream. It takes a period of time. The studies say anywhere from like 10 minutes to 3 hours. The average is around 45 minutes for absorption for alcohol to be fully absorbed. And then you'd hit your peak at that point and then start coming back down.
So you could have 3 shots of booze within 5 minutes and have a 5-minute drive home if you happen to live close to the bar or whatever. And that would theoretically be both legal and safe, you think?
I absolutely believe that. And the science supports that. The issue
Not
is
that a lot of people have 3 shots in 5 minutes and live within 5 minutes of a bar, but, you know, maybe it's arguable, right?
And I don't recommend doing that, but I think that is legal and safe. And the issue then is that if they were to get stopped during that time period, the officer is going to say, "Oh, I smelled a very strong odor of an alcoholic beverage." A strong odor, by the way, is an indication of recent drinking, not a lot of drinking, and that's in police training materials. And we do have that also in the Springsteen case.
Right.
And
so
then,
they found a bottle of Patron, an empty bottle of Patron that was that size, 750 milliliters. And I know you were, when we were talking offline, you were telling me that you subscribe to listservs where there's been a lot of buzz about this. So maybe you have some additional information that has not been in published news stories. What I'm wondering is, whose bottle of tequila was that? In the cops' arrest report, it simply says there's an empty bottle, and you can draw your own conclusions. I guess one might infer it was Springsteen's, but in some of the news stories I've read, it said that fans stopped him and wanted to take pictures, and they offered him shots of tequila. Yet I don't see any mention of that in the officer's probable cause report. So where did this come from that it might be fans who provided the tequila?
yeah, those are the reports that I've seen, that it was some fans who invited him to take a shot, and he did. I'm not sure where it came from. I mean, maybe they gave an interview to some news outlet. I don't know where it came from. I don't have that information.
Right. Well, Springsteen has a reputation for accepting alcohol from strangers. I think we have some footage there. Let me bring the volume down a little bit. Here he is. I think that's in Philadelphia. And looks like our video is stalling. That's not good. But this is a shot of him taking a seat at the arena there and chugging beer. Maybe you could come up with some different source of that video. Hang on 1 second. Yeah, I think we do have that. Here he is in, I think, Philadelphia. You know, to me, the most amazing thing about that is there was a little less than half of beer left in the cup when it was handed to him. And I remember reading somewhere that the more it gets down to the bottom of the cup or the bottle, the higher percentage of what's in there is actually saliva as opposed to beer. You know, in this coronavirus era that we live in, can you imagine just taking anybody's beer and guzzling it down like that?
Well, certainly not beer. I think vodka might have a high enough alcohol content to kill the virus, but beer doesn't. So that's maybe a problem.
He's actually drinking saliva, 20% saliva or something like that. So I've been watching the impeachment trial, or whatever you call it, and there's been some question about whether or not the video footage they're showing, which is very emotional, would actually be admissible as evidence if it were a court of law. So would it be admissible to say, oh, that Springsteen has a habit of just guzzling beer that strangers hand him, or is this completely irrelevant?
I think it's completely irrelevant. And in California, certainly under the evidence code, you cannot use character evidence to assail a defendant except in very limited circumstances. So showing that he did something like that in the past is not going to be relevant. And I mean, you've got a video of him drinking half a beer. Okay. I mean, that doesn't show anything that he.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like he guzzled 2 entire beers in a row or anything like that.
I think he's pouring more down his face there and down his shirt than he's actually drinking. I was trying to watch to see if he's actually swallowing anything. I'm not sure. And those kind of videos, Jeff, certainly don't show that he's planning to drive after drinking those things. So you can drink as much as you want if you're not planning to drive. And I'm sure at those concerts he has a paid driver. It's not a problem.
That's probably a safe assumption. But is that a thing, like guzzling beer and not even worrying about half of it dribbling down your face? Is that a thing that you do? Like
what I do, Jeff. I value my alcohol and I try not to let it spill at all.
Right. All right. So the boss, if I may be bold enough to call him the boss, doesn't have much to worry about in the way of his reputation, but it is kind of fun to uncover these videos.
Sure.
And note that Jeep's spokesman, on occasion, takes some quantity of alcohol from strangers and enjoys it quite immensely.
Is this sponsored by Jeep?
Yeah, you don't know about the Jeep controversy?
No, is our program sponsored by Jeep?
I don't think so, but they may be looking for a new place to spend their ad dollars, given the new development.
We should definitely approach them and tell them that I can get their boy Bruce a much better result in this situation. Except I'm not admitted in New Jersey, but my buddy Steve Hernandez is. We'll hook him up.
Oh, you are connected. All right, so I take it. I take your point that this is not admissible as evidence in court, but in the court of public opinion, one could say, I wonder about that bottle of Patron. Maybe he did have more than 2 shots. Now, the officer witnessed 1 shot, and Springsteen himself, according to the arrest report, said he had 2 shots within the last 20 minutes. Now, how common is it for
another lesson that it's a bad idea to say anything to the police because he just made himself look worse?
All right, well, let's get into that. And let's get into that by first, let me ask you this question. When somebody tells a police officer how much he or she has had to drink, how often is that accurate versus them maybe underplaying the amount slightly, if not a lot?
Yeah.
What would be your anecdotal take on that?
Well, for one thing, the police absolutely do not believe a driver when they tell the police how much they've supposedly had to drink. And as a rule of thumb, the cop assumes they should double that.
Right.
And it's incredibly common. The most common response to an officer is, yeah, I've had 2 beers. They hear that all the time.
Mm-hmm. 2 is like people. Is that because you think, like I guess you can't mind read every human in the world instantaneously, but would you maybe guess that people say 2 because it just sort of sounds believable, like none would not be believable, and they certainly don't want to admit to having 10? Is that why you think people say 2?
Yeah, I think that's very common, and people want to try to minimize it. And if people are drunk, they don't think very clearly anyway. So it's maybe it's not their clearest moment to think about that and have to say what they're what's coming off at the top of their head in that moment.
Right. I'm having trouble reading this, so maybe it's better to go by memory.
I can read it fine on the screen.
Oh, you can read it. All right. Your eyesight is better than that. Oh, I know. I could just enlarge the screen. So, okay, now I can read it. Springsteen smelled strongly of alcohol coming off his person and had glassy eyes. I ran Springsteen through standardized field sobriety test. I observed 4 out of 6 clues on the horizontal gaze nystagmus test. Is that how to pronounce it?
That is correct. Horizontal gaze nystagmus. We call it HGN for short.
Oh, yeah, in the biz. Springsteen was visibly swaying back and forth while I observed his eyes. I observed 5 out of 8 clues on the walk and turn test. Springsteen took a total of 45 total steps during the walk and turn instead of the instructed 18. Springsteen refused to provide a sample on the preliminary breath test. So it says he refused to take a test, but on the other hand, there's the result of a test. So is that odd for a police officer to leave that part out of the report, that he refused but then did take the test later?
Right. So it's about what the nature of this particular report is. This is a statement of probable cause and the officer's probable cause for making the arrest.
Oh, okay.
The test that he did take was a post arrest, and what we would often think of as an implied consent chemical breath test, which happens after he's arrested. This is a statement of probable cause for making the arrest. So the officer is marshaling the evidence to show that he had probable cause to believe that a crime was committed and therefore had jurisdiction to actually make an arrest in this situation.
So refusing to take the test is probable cause?
No, it's not. But that's part,
So
I mean, the officer's flushing out those facts as to what he had at the time. What he's relying on is, the what did it say? Flush face, watery eyes, those kinds of things.
Yeah, he smelled alcohol, and he did 45 steps when asked to do 18. So what do we make of the 45 versus 18? I was saying yesterday on Facebook that he's a rock star who probably has hearing loss, so maybe he just thought he said do 45 or didn't hear how many to do.
So for one thing, these standardized field sobriety tests are supposedly scientifically validated from studies going back to the late 70s by NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, as well as the International Association of Chiefs of Police. There are a series of studies supposedly validating these things at various blood alcohol content levels. And so there are these clues that are there. And one issue is that these tests are not validated for anybody over age 65. My understanding is that Mr. Springsteen was 72 at the time of these tests, so they shouldn't even have been administered, and they're certainly not valid in terms of providing any relevant information to the officer. So, as an
meaning that a person who's of that age tends to walk unsteadily and have poor coordination relative to younger people, even when they're sober.
Right. A walk and turn test, it's a divided attention test, and it's largely a balance test. So, and I do these tests for community groups. I have more training than the average police officer when it comes to field sobriety testing and DUI investigations. Those white notebooks that you can see on the shelf behind me are actually police training manuals related to DUI investigations. I recently published a book about DUI arrests and the whole process of what happens there. So, I have a little bit of credibility in this area. And, so I've actually read the validation studies. And yeah, this is primarily a balance test, this walk and turn. And somebody who, I do these things for community groups and pull stone cold sober people out of the audience, and they fail these types of tests all the time.
Now, when you say this type of test, would that include, just simply taking a certain number of steps, or is it more?
That's one of the 8 clues. So the walk and turn test has 8 clues that are supposedly validated.
And are you saying that none of them are valid for a person of Springsteen's age, or only the more difficult ones?
There's an insufficient sample size in the validation studies that supposedly validated these tests.
All the
people
tests
over age 65. It's in the NHTSA training manuals that they train officers from, that these tests are not validated for people over 65 years of age.
Okay, I'm just trying to clarify, when you say these tests, you mean 100% of them? Because my assumption is some of them are more difficult than others. That's why I'm asking.
The standardized field sobriety tests that are supposedly standardized and scientifically validated for alcohol include 3 tests. There's the HGN, horizontal gaze nystagmus test, which the officer did here. There's the walk and turn, which the officer did here. And there's the one leg stand, which there's no mention of. Okay. So these 3 tests are supposed to be taken together and in conjunction to help the officer make a determination as to whether somebody is safe to drive.
Right.
It's clear to me that the officer did not conduct these tests appropriately. For one thing, you shouldn't be giving them to somebody who's over 65, because it's not useful information.
Got it. Okay. So the 45 steps, when he was asked to do 18, that's the walk and turn test, right?
That's part of the walk and turn test.
Okay. So I'm still curious though. Let's say he was younger and somebody did that. It just seems to me that, it would be very easy for somebody to claim, well, they just didn't hear what they were asked to do. Am I right about that or no?
Well, I mean, they can claim anything they want. Usually the defendant is not going to testify, so it's left to the attorney to try to explain it away. I mean, I don't know why an officer would let him do 45 steps. That's 3 times the number of steps on the test. I've certainly never seen that.
It could just be a clever getaway. Starting at around step number 40, I'd be worrying about the defendant taking off.
Yeah, I'm going to walk heel to toe for 3 miles, and you walk right on out of this park.
Well, typically, do cops videotape these tests?
If a police officer has body cam, absolutely. And I think that's a great reason that every officer in the country everywhere should have body cam and have a department policy, if not a law, that says they shall do these on camera.
Okay. So if you were defending Springsteen, you think you could get this thrown out that the tests aren't valid. And
I
let's look
absolutely
at
think these tests are not valid. And,
okay.
and
Let's look at the other
number of
elements.
steps is one clue out of 8 possible clues. NHTSA would tell you that it takes 4 clues to demonstrate possible impairment, and the officer observed 5, including that number of steps.
Right. And what about the other elements? He was witnessed drinking. I mean, so you don't have any beef with the probable cause, assuming that's truthful, right?
Yeah, I mean, he saw him drinking. He doesn't know how much he drank. I don't think I necessarily have a problem with the reasonable suspicion for the stop. I think I might have an issue with probable cause to make an arrest based on these observations and the totality of the circumstances.
Well, how much more would there can you give me a sense of the difference between the amount of evidence you've heard about in this case versus how much would be needed to make an arrest? What more was needed normally? You don't mind if I switch my getting a little. Thank you.
Yeah, you're fine.
Did you hear the question, Don?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's.
I mean, drinking openly. Again, we don't know if it was the truth, but assuming it's the truth, he sees the guy drinking. He says that he smells it on his breath. He gives him tests to do, which aren't legal, but nonetheless, that's what he did. So how much more is needed to justify a drunk driving arrest?
Well, it's a subjective standard based on the totality of the circumstances. Most judges would find this to be enough. As a defense attorney, I disagree with most judges. So
because it's your job.
Sure.
Right.
So, and this is a case where I might very well file a motion to suppress evidence based on what I believe to be a lack of probable cause to make the arrest. And then it would be up to a judge to decide ultimately whether this was enough.
All right. So if anybody needs your services, let's just take a pause. And this is a little look at the law practice of Don Hammond, criminal defense hero.
In a DUI case, there's a lot to investigate and there are a lot of potential issues. Every case is different, and that's why we have to look at the unique facts of each case to figure out where the defenses are. As a defense attorney, investigating the case is job number 1. The first thing we need to do is figure out whether the police made a mistake or whether my client made a mistake. Very often the police don't do the field sobriety tests correctly. Sometimes there are problems with the blood or breath tests and the science, and having an attorney who understands the investigative procedures as well as the science of alcohol metabolism is essential.
As your attorney, I need to know, did the people who are allegedly your clients in that video, did they sign release forms entitling you to display their images publicly?
Yes, of course they did, Jeff. And those are actual clients.
They are actual clients?
Yes, those are actual clients for whom I got great results, and they were happy to help me out and be a part of my videos.
That is amazing. I would not think most people would want to advertise publicly that they were arrested for drunk driving.
Well, we don't use their names in the video, but yeah.
I see. All right. So that's donhammondlaw.com is the website, and 888, what was it?
DUI Hero.
888 DUI Hero. That is very important in the world of marketing to have an easy to remember website address and phone number. You are on top of your game,
Well,
Don.
I always say it as 888 DUI Hero. It's
Excellent.
Easy to remember.
You put the Esquire in Donald Hammond Esquire. Absolutely. I have no idea what that means. All right. So getting back to the elements of the case, the .02, what do you make of that? I mean, it sounds to me like it's nothing for the state of New Jersey to hang its hat on. It's well below. It's just flat out not illegal to be driving at that level, right?
Absolutely. So, I mean, most states do have 2 different DUI statutes. So it is possible to charge somebody for being under .08. For example, in California, we have a 23152A and a 23152B. The B count is the .08 that we all know and loved. And the A count is driving while under the influence. So it's just if the state can make a case that you were impaired by alcohol at any level, then they can charge you with that A count. And we see that.
Now, I think that means that if you're below the legal limit but driving erratically, there would need to be evidence of you driving erratically, correct? I mean, if you're below the legal limit and driving perfectly, it seems to me that that's absolutely nothing, right?
Sure. So they're going to try to make their case based on the observed driving pattern as well as their field sobriety tests.
What driving pattern? What driving pattern? It said that he started the engine on his motorcycle and that was the end of it.
No, I'm saying in general. In this case, yeah, they don't have a driving pattern to try to make a case. They'll try to make it based on field sobriety tests, answers to questions. He said he had 2 shots. I don't think they're going to be able to make a case here for a DUI at all. I think this is perhaps the weakest case of a DUI where I've actually seen documents, because when I get DA rejects on cases, I don't know, I never even see the police reports on these kinds of cases.
Well, Springsteen's a famous guy, so that may impact how the situation is being handled. Do you think they should just throw this case out, or is it typical to actually go ahead and prosecute a case like this and then take a shot in court, or do they throw cases out when they're this weak?
No, I think this case should be a DA reject, and I think the government shouldn't even file the case actually in court. Now, if they is
that criminal defense hero bias talking, or is that typically what happens? That's maybe two different things.
No, I think that's what happens in these cases, right? That a prosecutor looks at it, reviews the reports, and says, we don't have anything here. Now, if they really want to try to make an example of them, especially because there's media coverage, they may file a case for the drinking in the park that he's not supposed to do, that kind of a thing. They can prove that. They've got an officer who saw him drinking in the park, and he's not supposed to.
Oh, right. They
can file that case, but I don't think they're even going to file a DUI, and I don't think they're going to file a reckless driving either.
Yeah. And this drinking in a park business, isn't it just plain illegal to drink in public almost anywhere anyway? It seems like it's a redundancy to make an issue of it being in the park.
Well, in other words, that depends on state and local law. I mean, places like Vegas or New Orleans, certainly you can drink in public. I'm not sure what New Jersey law says about that, but this is on federal land in a federal park. So state law applies through a weird procedure, but I mean, there's a federal law that says you can't drink in.
Oh, okay. So it might be in certain parts of federal property, it might be legal to drink alcohol, like I don't know where, but
yeah, in the bar in the park. I don't know, but yeah, this is on federal land. There's this federal statute that says you can't drink in this area of the federal property. So they could file that kind of a case against.
What about during an insurrection at the Capitol? Would it be legal to consume alcohol then?
I think it's probably not.
Especially if you're wearing a funny hat with horns, that would be very dangerous. All right, let's see if we have any more.
Drinking while wearing a horny hat is always a difficult proposition.
Even though it's completely irrelevant, let's see if we have any more evidence of Bruce Springsteen's habit of accepting drinks from strangers. Hey, there you go, joining the boss. I think the question is, does he ever not drink? Who ever realized he drank so much until now? All right, where are you at now in your blood alcohol content? You were already on your way to about a 10-year prison sentence.
Yeah, right. Let's see if we can get a reading here. I did just take a sip, so we'll see. Now
you're making your point very vividly, Don. But all right, I'll let you get through this before I ask my probing question.
It's going to take a few minutes, but let's see what it ends up being
to get a result. Okay. All right. Now, you're making your point very vividly when you showed that the reading was 0.40 after hardly any alcohol consumption at all. But on the other hand, it is so preposterous that I find it hard to believe that this test is even used in court. If the result you just showed me is typical of how inaccurate it is, how could there be any argument at all to use this?
So there are safeguards in place against the police doing what I'm doing. Every state and the manufacturer of these machines says you're supposed to wait at least 15 minutes. It's called a deprivation or observation period. at least 15. I think it should be at least 20 in between somebody taking a drink or putting anything in their mouth. There I am, 0.11. I'm still over the legal limit. And that's because I just took a sip. That's clearly mouth alcohol.
Okay. So that's what it's all about then. The breathalyzer is not as inaccurate as it seems unless you do it immediately after drinking. But if you
do
wait
it immediately after drinking, you have a mouth alcohol problem. It also has issues during the absorption phase. So
Right.
because I haven't stopped drinking for an hour or so to let it fully absorb, the breath device is not going to be very accurate.
Right. All right. So what is
there
your
are no safeguards for that? There are no safeguards in place for somebody with a rising blood alcohol content. And those kinds of arguments are made frequently in DUI cases, especially if somebody does the preliminary device in the field and they blow like a 0.09 and then they go to the station an hour later and they blow a 0.11 or a 0.12. Now I've got a great rising argument that at the time of driving, they may well have been under 0.08 because I have a test, a half hour after driving at 0.09, a test an hour and a half after driving at 0.12. You can see that pattern that they're rising. And at the time of driving, they were probably under an 0.08.
Well, I mean, if it was in the hypothetical you just presented, you said 0.09. So the time between them when they were driving and when they were tested is probably only going to be a couple of minutes, right?
Well, we need at least 15 minutes to have any hope of accuracy on the preliminary breath test so that we know that they haven't ingested anything in that time period. And typically in between there, the officer's asking all their pre-SFST questions. They're putting people through the field sobriety tests. So there's usually about a half-hour delay from driving until they get to the preliminary alcohol screening device or preliminary breath test, they call it in New Jersey, the PBT. Same thing.
All right. So what is your advice to somebody who has been pulled over for suspicion of drunk driving? And is the answer to that question always going to be the same, or does it depend on how much, if any, the person had been drinking?
So hopefully before that happens, Jeff, they've read my book. That would be a great idea.
And they would already know the answer to that question.
Yeah, right. No, seriously though, people should not answer questions. At that point, the officer has made a stop. If they're asking sort of pre-FST and sobriety related questions, the officer has already smelled an odor of alcohol, seen glassy eyes, bloodshot, watery eyes, a flushed face. The officer already has what he thinks he needs to make an arrest at that point, most likely. So there's no reason to give them any more evidence and answer any questions about how much they've had to drink, where they were drinking, where they're going, how much sleep they've had, when they last ate, what they ate, whether they're under the care of a physician. All these are part of the pre-SFST questions that officers are going to ask. And there's no reason to answer any of those. Next,
and is your answer the same as when somebody has been drinking as it is when they have not been drinking? In other words, if somebody knows they're stone cold sober, they still should not answer the question.
They should not answer any questions.
Okay.
And then the officer is going to ask them to step out of the vehicle if they haven't already. You should step out of the vehicle or else you're going to be dragged out of the vehicle. Not a very fun time.
Right.
The officer is going to ask you to participate in roadside gymnastics, the standardized field sobriety tests, which are the horizontal gaze nystagmus test, which is an involuntary twitch in the eye that happens. Can be caused by alcohol, can be caused by at least 50 other things. Officers always believe it's caused by alcohol. So there's the horizontal gaze nystagmus test, there's the one leg stand, and the walk and turn are the standard 3-pack battery of standardized field sobriety tests. There's no reason for most drivers to do any of those.
All right. And do you have a recommendation as to the words to use when declining, or the tone of voice, or anything, or is it just take your pick as long as you simply don't do the test? What do you think?
I mean, you should absolutely be polite and cooperative and say, I'd love to cooperate, but my attorney would kill me. That's always a fine response. Or, I politely decline to participate in your field sobriety tests. You can just say, no, I don't want to do them. That's all fine. The officer may make a weak attempt to try to convince you, but most of the time they're going to say, okay, no problem. You don't want to do that. How about this? They'll pull out their preliminary alcohol screening device, stick that in your face and ask you to blow into that. You should also say no to that. It's the appropriate thing to do. It's not required. And then if the officer believes that after you not answering his questions, not doing field sobriety tests, not blowing into his machine, If he believes he has enough for probable cause to make an arrest, he'll do it. Fun fact about when the officer asks you to step out of the car, there's about a 95% chance you're going to get arrested regardless. So there's no reason to provide them any more evidence at that point. Now, once those silver bracelets go on, the officer actually puts the cuffs on your wrists. You're in the cuffs. Then you have to make a choice between blood or breath. And usually I recommend choosing blood for most people. However, if you know that there are other extracurriculars in your system, breath is probably the way to go. I've had clients who choose blood and then they also find the cocaine and the marijuana. And that is a worse situation than if you just blown into the device, given them the alcohol only result that they can get from breath. And then we can fight the case from there.
Okay, so I think you just made reference to a very important distinction that's probably worth repeating, worth highlighting to make sure people have grasped it, because if they're not a lawyer, it may not be apparent to them. And that is the preliminary test that they are asked to do is what they are not required by law to do.
You don't have to do anything until the bracelets go on.
And then it is required to take a blood, breath, or do they do the urine test anymore?
In California, it's just blood or breath unless there are some weird extenuating circumstances. I've seen a urine test once in the last 5 years. It's very rare.
Okay, so usually blood or breath. And at that point, if you are arrested, it is required by law. So what if somebody refuses? What happens to such a person?
In California, if you refuse the test, there are enhancements that can be filed in court. Usually that's not that big of a deal. The bigger problem with a refusal is with the DMV. You're going to get a year hard suspension of your driver's license that is very difficult to avoid.
Right.
And that's a hard suspension. So there's no restricted license option. There's no driving to and from school or work. There's no ignition interlock device. It's no driving for a solid year. You're done. Do not pass go.
I see. So I take it you would recommend complying with that requirement.
Yes, you're going to be in a better position by complying. And then the
what if
worst
you refuse to take the coronavirus vaccine? What happens then? A spanky?
I don't think that there's any legal requirement to take that vaccine at this point, though. I'm anxious to get in line for it as soon as I can.
All right. So I think we probably might want to take an opportunity here to just encourage people to not drink and drive. This whole discussion is about what to do if one winds up, unfortunately, in that situation. But I'm sure.
Do not drink and drive.
And if you do want to drink, the best way to do it is at home in front of your web camera with us on the Wine
Absolutely.
Diaries. All right. Well, Don, I think we've covered it all. And anybody who wants to apprise themselves of the highlights of this of the laws pertaining to drunk driving can just review this recording very carefully. And otherwise, if they need further consultation, you are available. Is that correct?
I am absolutely available. 888 DUI Hero is the number. I'm easy to get a hold of. Feel free to buy the book on Amazon or just email me. I'll shoot you the electronic version for free.
All right. And for those of you who think that Springsteen has never guzzled beer at Fenway Park, I leave you with this.
It looks like less of it going down his shirt there. He's improving.
Yeah. Well, when you practice as much as he does, it's inevitable that you'll eventually grasp the ideas to go into the mouth and down the old throat.